The morning of the Marshall Fire, we had a heightened sense of awareness for the wildfire risk because of the weather report, and you could feel it outside. It was dry and the wind was going nuts, and it progressively got worse as the day went on.
And, I was actually on shift that day of the fire on engine 57, and we could see the smoke column. And we had initial calls, multiple calls for Rocky Flats. So we went up Indiana and noticed that it wasn't on the flats and it was out of our district, but it was coming from Boulder County. So we were aware that we were going to have a busy day with the winds, sustained winds in 60, 70 miles an hour. It was pretty intense up there when you got the engine getting rocked around. So we were prepared. We knew we were going to be out there sooner or later.
You know, obviously you come to work, and I think guys do this job because they like running different types of calls and being involved in different types of things. And when you crested that hill and you saw that smoke, you realized that this was completely different than anything different that you've ever been involved in. So
you didn't really have any place where you could just get a tow hold to start work. And I remember I called home, and I actually talked to someone else on the fire department, and I said, hey, I'm getting anxiety. I don't know exactly where we should start. And they reminded me at that time that I took and used on this fire is, hey, when there's nowhere to start, just look for some control feature, whether it's a wide road, the separation of power lines, overhead power lines. And so that's exactly what I did. When I pulled into the neighborhood to the west of Dillon Road, I drove all the way to the end in Turnberry Circle, and I stopped and took a moment, and I looked up and I saw power lines above. And so that's where I said, that's where we're gonna make our stand. Soon after, it was about 20 minutes, we lost 2 blocks between us and the fire. And so I was thinking 10 minutes per block of houses we were losing because it was just eating. And it became untenable where we were, enough to where I was on Red Northwest, and I told the guys that we need to cut and run. It was time to abandon all lines, leave equipment in place.
Just to see what we went through, the devastation, it's, you know, the best way I can describe it is a war scene, because that's what it looked like. When you've seen burnt vehicles in the middle of major streets that I normally drive through, and to go shopping and you're like, wow, this is crazy. And then you go into neighborhoods where there's one house standing and then the rest of the neighborhood's gone. And I said, that really gets your attention pretty fast there. And you really have to think about the people that lived in those homes. It's like, man, what happened here? And how are they going to recover from this?
So radio Captain Finnegan, and he met up with us and did a face-to-face, and he said, what do you think about this house? And I said, I think the only way we're going to save this block is if we are pretty aggressive with what we should do. And he said, I'm going to give you 10 minutes, and I'm going to be your incident command outside. And so Ryan, we were hooked up to a hydrant. Brett Morton and Troy Rodvald pulled a line to the front door, got that attic fire put out, and you know, it went so smooth, and those guys worked so hard that, you know, they're the reason that house is still standing, is the amount of work that they put in.
And it stood out to me as we passed, you know, there's burned out car. I could see rooftops, shrubbery in the middle of an empty parking lot on fire, and so much smoke, but the Tesla dealership on my right was on fire. And it was eerie because on duty, and we had an assignment, so we drove right past a car dealership on fire.
And then eventually, as things progressed, I went over to Good Sam later that night to help with that evacuation. I can't remember how many people we got out of there, but we had probably a queue of 40 or 50 ambulances up at Good Sam. Our ambulances went back up there again. We got another request from Michelle Dillon prior to me going up there for ambulances for that evacuation, because ours had already cleared from the other one.
And I think for all of us who were working those 2 days, that was our holy cow moment. It's like, man, these winds have got to stop because we're not going to make any progress. And I know guys did a great job. Men and women from all over the metro area were fighting the best they could, but you know, unfortunately, there was not much we could do until that wind stopped.
Once the peak of our incident had died down, it was you know, essentially going from home to home and putting out the debris piles that had collapsed into the basements. And what was interesting about the rest of that night was, you know, you would go from house to house to house, and see what the previous crews through the area had kind of done, from setting up sprinkler systems against houses as like quick protection type things as quick as they could, to then gas lines that were just still burning out of the ground. So.
Yeah, before the Marshall Fire, I would have swore that that wasn't possible here on the Front Range. A lot of times in a large-scale wildfire, when it burns in and takes out neighborhoods, at first it'll lift up and it'll be in the canopy of trees, and you'll have fire overhead and it'll roll through. But this was a ground fire. So this is a ground fire that caused a few structures to catch, and from then with the wind, it just went building to building to building. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. The Marshall Fire hopefully was a once-in-a-lifetime event. I'm happy I was able to help out on the incident, but yet I hope we never have something like that here in Arvada.